Welcome to Le Rendezvous. My name is Garance Doré and I'm a writer with so many stories to tell and ideas to share that I created this special moment to talk about all the things that are going on in our lives. So come, let's spend a moment together. Le Rendezvous is brought to you by Doré, the skincare line I co-created, wanting to bring more simplicity and efficacy to our lives. Check out the end of the episode for a special code just for you, the Rendezvous listeners. Today, I want to tell you about a relationship that I had. It's actually a kind of relationship that I've observed a lot around me. I called it the Man Project. I remember meeting him, and the first thing that I felt was a sense of fascination. It was very interesting. Immediately at the first look, it was one of these relationships that make you feel incredible highs. I also remember feeling like he probably wasn't the right guy for me, that we were so different. But a little voice inside of me, you've probably had that voice before, a little voice inside of me told me, well, but there is a lot of potential here. Right? We're very different. He's incredibly attractive to me. And for the rest, we can figure it out. I was seeing him more as a potential than actually for who he truly was. And that was since the beginning. And I remember that I used to ask my friends and my loved ones, how do you like him? What do you think of him? Because there was something inside of me that was unsure of what I was doing. We started a relationship really quick. It was very passionate. I was never quiet inside. I didn't feel reassured. And I think that I mistake the signals for true and deep love and passion, and the sign that probably he was the one. Obviously, since the beginning, I didn't want to see the real person that he was. I started very early, constantly finding excuses. He wasn't very successful at his work, and I thought that that was because he hadn't been discovered yet. He wasn't as sophisticated as I was, and I thought, well, I live in a fake world. I should be more real like he is. And I remember him telling me things like that, and me completely wanted to buy into that thing that my world wasn't real and that his really was. So there was this kind of weird imbalances right away. And I kept on blocking all this information that was coming through to only see all that emotional craziness around our relationship and all the potential that I saw in him, because everything that wasn't exactly right, I either found an excuse or I thought, oh, that's very easy to change, because with a love like that, there's nothing that we can't do. And obviously, because I think we're both feeling out of our comfort zone and out of our depth, we were doubling down on narratives like we're twin flames, we were made for each other, I finally met the one. All these things that often we use to reassure ourselves that we're not making a big mistake. I think the main mistake that I made was not only that I felt, oh, I can help him get better, because this is so presumptuous, but worse, I went as far as saying, well, I need to change. And that's how we entered this relationship. Both of us very unsure, and both of us not really wanting to see the reality of the other. There is this expression today that I think is overused, but it's also very interesting and very true. It's that idea of not being seen or not seeing someone. And I think that in the concept of the Man Project, which I know it's a terrible way to put it, but that's kind of what came to me, okay? In the concept of the Man Project, it's exactly what happens. It's not the entire person we see, it's a person we want to see. We're projecting something of them, which is our creation. And the rest of the relationship will be like a sculptor trying to shape someone into something we want them to be. This sense of passionate love is something that I've had many times. It's something that has pushed me to make so many mistakes with people. I think now that I'm more mature and that I've met someone who I feel really at ease with and in a sense of love that's more calm and that brings me support and affection and all these lovely, delicious things that are basically everything but crazy passion. I think for most of my life, I mistake those signals, feeling tense in my body, feeling really in overdrive, feeling desperate, only being able to focus on love, doing everything to capture the attention of the person I'm in love with, only being able to think about them, only being able to talk about them, and all of this taking over my entire life. I think it's normal in the beginning to feel a little bit excited, euphoric, passionate, but there is a level to where it becomes worrying. And that's always where I used to be with these types of guys. I've learned that our body recognizes things that are dangerous quicker than our brains. And I think that this feeling of uneasiness, of our body being extra stressed, is actually our body recognizing the red flags, the ones that we're trying to find excuses for. So I ignored all the signals and settled slowly in a relationship. It took probably a year for me to feel like myself again. And there were some great times because this type of relationship really challenges you and it takes so much of your attention. Being with someone that's so different, that doesn't speak the same emotional language, that challenges us in many ways, it can be amazing because it's almost like a drug. It takes you out of your normal life. It questions everything you are. And there can be some good things in that, but there can be also things that we mistake for true love. So we met and we struggled and we fought and we told ourselves stories about being made for one another because we really wanted this to work. And I think there was part of us that was desperate, that was really like, when is love going to be there for me? And we really wanted it so much that we stayed together and decided to make this a serious relationship. The first months after you decide to build a life together are beautiful. There is this sense of possibilities of everything that's going to happen. There are all the excuses we find for certain behaviors that don't work. There is projects and dreams, and we think that being with that person will change our life. I feel like for a moment, I was really happy. There is this moment when that's it. You live together, everybody knows you as a couple. Reality hits, life hits. And I think that's when I started realizing that there were things that were never going to change. And that's when I started getting disappointed. Let me give you a few examples. One very simple one. He was incredibly messy to a point that was making me insane. It was things everywhere, just shoes, his stuff, always everywhere. Just like our sense of cleanliness was very different. So even the way he was cleaning the dishes, I was like, but this is not clean. Look, it's not shiny. And I know it sounds petty, but those little things really started contaminating all of our world. I was trying to wash his things, I was trying to organize his corners, and I was trying to make everything look the way that I wanted. And he could never be at the standards that I had. So I ended up telling him, okay, you have a room for yourself. You can keep it as messy as you want. If you need mess, this is your place. Not realizing that in doing so, I was basically helping us create two homes in one. So there was my part of the house, basically all the house, that was all clean and shiny and exactly as I wanted it. And his room, which was a nice room, it wasn't just a corner in the basement, but it was an explosion of mess that I wouldn't even want to look into. Incredibly symbolic, if you ask me. There was also the sophistication part. So, you know me, I worked in fashion. I love beautiful things and I love being well dressed and I love going to nice restaurants. And there was always this part of me, this French woman on the go. And he was coming from a totally different background. He loved fishing and hunting and all the things that he said were the real things. And I think that's where I made a mistake right away, is to allow myself to believe what he was saying. He started portraying himself as the lover of nature and me as this very superficial creature that only existed in very rarefied atmospheres, which, if you know me, that's never been the case. I've always been quite balanced, actually. But I let this narrative install itself in our couple, and I think it was difficult for both of us and we couldn't reconciliate it. So I would try to do all of these activities and go hunting with him and do all these things and really try to persuade myself that I loved fishing, for example, which is one of the things that I now can say I hate the most. It's so boring. I don't understand. But I would go and spend the day and tell my friends, oh my God, we're having so much fun. We're fishing together. This guy is taking me out of my reality and my fake world. And not realizing that in doing so, I was just lying to myself. I was not being myself. And when I tried to bring him into my world, it was a bit the same. He was uncomfortable. He wasn't happy. He wasn't feeling as an equal to everyone. And I was trying to push him to be that sophisticated guy. And it was just so complicated to do that to one another constantly. There was also just simply our differences in our goals in life. I know that I'm somebody that's quite ambitious, that loves seeing the world, that loves very deep, interesting conversations. And I think his goals were much smaller, not in a way that I would criticize. I have many members of my family who found real happiness just owning a small house, staying very local, having just a few friends, doing very simple, down to earth, that's what he used to say, activities, all these things that I really truly value. So it's really not a criticism. I actually think that for a while, I tried to change the way that I was to let myself have a thirst for these things. And again, I think deeply lying to myself. In the same way, I think he could see that he was constantly disappointing me with his small ambitions. And for example, I love great food and I love new restaurants, and it's not so much about money, but definitely you can feel a level of sophistication in what I like. Whereas he's very happy going to Subway. He loved all these kind of things. I remember we always fight because there was this Italian restaurant next to our house. And I really thought the food was terrible. And he loved it. That's what he thought was great. It was this kind of big lasagna, all these kind of things. And for a while I lied and I ate the food. And one day I was like, I'm just not loving this. So those are a few ways in which we were trying to make something work, But anytime it was such a sacrifice for the other, whether it's him coming into my world or me coming into his world, there was a sense of a lie somewhere. And I think the problem with that is how draining it is to the nervous system. Lies, whether they're told for good reasons, which I think we really were trying to do, is to be good to each other, or whether they're done for bad reasons, which is deception and things like that. Whatever the reason, lies drain you. Not being real with someone exhausts you. You have to play constantly at being another person than the one you truly are. So whatever your intentions are, if it's to make your couple function in harmony, if you're lying to yourself and to the other about who you are, there is a lot of chances that you're exhausted. It takes a lot of energy to sustain these types of relationships. And I could see it because one of the ways that I fill myself when I feel drained is food. And I started gaining so much weight. So I could see that something wasn't totally right. Keeping this lie alive was so hard. And I think we also started to be just outwardly frustrated. And I remember doing what I'd always done, and it's complaining to my friends. And my friends would be on my side. And I started turning the narrative of our beautiful, unexpected, wonderful couple of two different people that love each other so much that they make it work. Started transforming that slowly into he's not good enough, but now I'm stuck in this relationship, I'm disappointed. And of course, through my family and friends to whom I was complaining, getting completely validated in that. And I'll have to do a podcast about this constant validation that we get through our friends, which is absolutely normal. That's what we go to them for. But sometimes it can keep this kind of victimization of ourselves alive. You know, that friends who tell you, oh yes, you're too good for him. He's not enough. He's wrong, you're right, you did great, all of these things that, we have with our friends. And that's where we should go for that. It's just that it shouldn't be the only source of feedback on our relationships if our relationships don't feel good. I mean, unless you have one of these friends, which I might be sometimes, and sometimes I shouldn't, who'll just talk to you straight and tell you, look, you're making a huge mistake here, and this relationship is not going in the right direction. These people are very few, and sometimes it's really hard to hear it. But in general, it's good to have different sources of feedback. Books about relationships can really help. And of course, therapy. But that's another subject. So the relationship went from devastatingly passionate and insane and steamy and beautiful and this kind of alliance of two opposites to something a little bit fake, a fake smile over things that we could feel weren't really going well. And we were able to maintain that for a little bit and keep lying to ourselves and just make this work and do all the things that we didn't like to do, but make it for the other because we really want it to work. And it went then to disappointment, to blame, and to intense frustration. And that's where the relationship went, basically until its end. The road to our breakup was absolutely horrible. I think it took maybe a year or two of all of these fights and stress and exhaustion and not being able to talk and promising each other therapy and never being able to go and all of these things until one day, I don't know what happened to me, but I just basically left. And it's only after that, having time for myself and having regained a little bit of strength, I was just so exhausted in that relationship. And After the breakup, I was able to take care of myself because I wasn't constantly trying to hold up a lie. And that's when I started to see a little bit more of the truth. One day, after basically years of blaming him for having lied to me, for not wanting to be a better boyfriend, I realized, after doing some work on myself, that I was as guilty as he was, if not more, actually. I think that it's in part because that is the background in which I grew in. There is a certain relationship to men in my family. Women are really strong, and we often have these big sessions of criticizing the men. I remember I grew up, I'm a child of divorce, and literally spent most of my childhood listening to my mom telling me about how bad my father was, how he never would do anything with his life, how stupid he was. It was a very difficult and, I think, toxic environment for me. But that's what I grew up with. And my grandma was the same. And there was this narrative that men were like children. You've heard that before, probably. And there was a lack of respect for their truth and their reality, and the fact that well-loved men can be incredible support and incredible parts of couples. I had never had that modeled in front of me. I had always seen the same type of couples that criticize each other, and I just didn't know anything else. I also grew up in a world where women are taught that it's all about the hustle, that we have to be independent, that we get everything we want through work and through going out in the world and through strength and through control. And I think that often we end up bringing that into our relationships. In the case of my relationship, I met this guy. He was obviously not right for me, but I thought that with a lot of work and intention and strength, I could make this work. And that's when I realized that it wasn't love that I had felt, it was fear. Probably this man, who is a wonderful guy, awakened inside me feelings that I had in my youth. I don't know, I'm not going to go into like deep analysis, but I felt this mix of fear and attraction, knowing this wasn't good, but also being attracted because that's what I knew. And what that fear sparked in me was an incredible need for control. And that I had entered that relationship probably wanting to control him, probably wanting to repair all the things that my father and my mother hadn't been. I don't know. But there was this kind of, I think that when we feel so much agitation in our body when we meet someone, it's actually a sign, not that it's passion, but that it's old triggers and old trauma that's coming up to the surface. And instead of saying, oh, let's take a look at this, what does it mean? Let's take a break, breathe, instead of throwing ourselves in a relationship, just take a second and be like, what does this remind me of? And instead of doing that, I went straight into, I'm going to control this and I'm going to make it happen because I'm a strong, independent woman. What's interesting too, if you're that woman like me that used to like being in control, that mistakes a project for love and power for affection, you're going to attract the type of guys who love that. Because one thing I can tell you is that anytime I've tried to apply this sense of control, of being the strong one, of navigating the relationship, of basically letting a guy understand that I could help him, that I was so cool and so detached, and all the things that I always pretend I am when I start a relationship, basically, until my last one, which I entered in a very different way. You're going to scare off guys that are a bit more balanced and that want equality in a couple. They're going to run on the other side of the planet. You're going to also scare off men who like to be in control. I mean, I'm talking about heterosexual relationships in that case, but it's probably the same in terms of just the energy, right? So if you come in a relationship with that sense of strength and power, the only ones that are going to stay around you are people who might not want to say it, but are looking to be a bit dominated, a bit controlled. I've always thought that relationships are created on silent contracts, unconscious things that we agree upon very early in the relationship. We can set a total opposite. I remember that guy, my ex, telling me, "Oh, you're never going to change me." Where I think the contract right away between us was, "I'm going to help you be a better guy." I think if he had been more balanced, he would have run away from me, and he should have, because I was really bad for him. And that's something that I've learned through the years, is when people run away from us, that maybe they're doing the right thing and that we should trust that. And that's why I believe in being a little more passive and not try to force people to love us when we're dating. I'll come back to that in the podcast if you'd like. So men who don't want to be controlled, they run away. And we end up attracting the type of guy who likes a woman in charge. And it sounds okay when said like that. Why not? Why couldn't it work? And I think that's a very fair question. But I'm worried, and that's what happened in my stories, that instead of fostering growth and peace and harmony in the couple, these types of silent contracts, if not very well understood between two people, will grow into frustration. Because if it hasn't been done consciously, willingly, the more control is relinquished, the more resentment might build up. Because, and that's what happened to me, the controller, in that case it was me, feels like they have to do all the work, and they're exhausted and disappointed, and they're trying to pull up the person and take them up to their level, and they start blaming them, which is what I was doing with the help of my friends. And that's terrible, because that sense of energy and strength and control was what we showed in the beginning, graciously giving to the other. So why change? And the one who's controlled and who suffers from it will often develop something that looks like passive aggressivity. And that will manifest in areas where power, where control is left to that person. So it's a little bit like the image of the house, right? I had control over the whole house that looked the way I wanted, clean and shiny. And I had given him the little spot, even though it was a nice room, it was just a little percentage of the whole house where he could be himself without a judgment. If you remove judgment to what's good in terms of cleanliness and harmony in a house, it was blatantly talking about our couple, about the fact that he had to hide himself in a little corner where he could feel like he was himself. And I think that the fact that this room was extremely messy, like impossibly, like shamefully messy, also showed how much suffering there was for his true self to be expressed in the relationship, and how I was stifling it. So here he is, left with a little bit of space that's his own, that I don't want to see, that I close the door to, that I refuse to acknowledge, because all I want from him is what I want him to be and not what he is. And so he'll start being even more messy, because that's his way of controlling his island that's left. He'll start reclaiming power where he has it, so he can be in places like intimacy, withholding sex. If you've had couples like that around you, or if you've been in one, you know this is often what happens, because sex is a place where power plays take a whole other life, and where relationships actually are pretty exposed. The person that's controlled can also start expressing his resentment and his hate to the controller. In my case, talking to me about my weight, because that's where he could find fault, because I was presenting myself as this perfect do-gooder in the relationship. Oh, look at me, I'm the one who keeps the house clean. It's just a symbol for the rest of our relationship. I'm the one who's working more. I'm the one who's shining brighter in society. So what could he criticize me on? What was left? Well, in this case, was my weight that was keeping growing, and that was making me so uncomfortable. It was so easy to poke at. And that's why those relationships can get really incredibly, terribly toxic. If we let these relationships go further and further into imbalance, love will slowly transform itself into hate. Love and hate are two very, very similar sentiments. They're strong. We don't know how to detach from them, and they make us feel something. You know, it makes me think of movies. When you see the villains wanting to gain more and more and more power, and the more they gain it, the more sad and terrible they look. And I think that's what's communicated in these movies and these books, is that power is not love. Power doesn't make you happy. Having full control of a relationship is actually the key to being miserable. You need to share. You need to be two in a relationship. It can't be just one and their creation. Can't be that. That's why the man project can't make you happy. I'm not sure how this type of man project relationships can be fixed. I've seen 3 different ways that things can go. So there is leaving, like I did, and going to lick your wounds and suddenly understanding, oh my God, what have I done? And then learning and taking responsibility, because taking responsibility for what we were is the only way that we can change. I could have stayed into blame, and I do think there was parts of him that were abusive to me, but I definitely also was abusive to him in many ways. So leaving and learning is one scenario, and it really worked for me. I'm happy now that this relationship didn't work, and I learned my lessons, and I'm now much more conscious of red flags of how I feel with people, and even more of when I feel my fear making me want to take control of people and things. And that is one place where I can easily go to. So bringing myself into a state of balance is always an important thing. I've seen also people staying in these relationships, many of them around me. I'd love to hear your point of view. Have you seen that? Have you lived it? Staying and letting the dynamic taking full hold of the couple. Can that work? Well, without judgment on the validity or the goodness or the healthiness of a relationship, because I just don't look at things like that. I think, does it work for these people? Because I think it's just too easy to put a judgment of value on these relationships. So can they work if you agree that it's a bit imbalanced and that there is suffering, but maybe that's what people want? Well, one of my great friends is in one of these relationships. The way I see it personally is that she's suffering a lot. The way she sees it is that they are perfect, that life is really hard, and that she is the victim of life, and she puts herself in the position of a martyr, and she's happy in that role. I have to admit this. I have to be able to see that. not everybody wants to be in healthy relationships. So her husband does not work. He spends an inordinate amount of time at the gym taking care of himself. He looks amazing. He looks 10 years younger than her. They're the same age. She has gained a lot of weight and she feels drained, and she works all day and she takes care of the kids, and life, as she says very often, is very hard and hasn't been generous with her. And I've followed this relationship for 20 years with that energy, and she does control her world. She's the one who holds the wallet because she's the only one working. She's the one who's raising the kids, so she can't be criticized or no fault can be found in her. And he plays the role of the lazy husband, and she can criticize him. And I think they've found a sense of balance. So it can work, even if it looks a bit neurotic from the outside. I've learned to not judge what people do and how they find their balance. I think, of course, therapy probably can help. I've always been horrible at therapy in couples because, as I told you, I realized much later that I had been a part of the problem. Had I gone to therapy with my ex, I probably would have sat down and tried to retell all his faults for an hour and try to put the therapist on my side. So I think in that case, it wouldn't have worked. But maybe if the two people are emotionally literate enough to understand what's going on, to want to change the dynamic, I'm sure there is hope. To finish, I want to say that a couple is always two people. There is rarely only one person to blame. It is very important to observe very patiently the beginnings of a relationship. Often everything is there already. Are you trying to appear as someone different than you are? Do you think with this man or with this woman, I'm going to change? Do you think I'll change them? You know very well that people can't change, but there is a difference between what we know and what we do, all the silent contracts. It's very important to remember that relationships are co-created, and that change only comes when two people together agree to it. When I look back at myself and how I was in that relationship, I feel a lot of guilt. I feel like I could have been a much better person. I also feel like that much better person would have been someone who would have said, he's not for you. He's just not for you. Just go away. Maybe spend the night with him and then just go, which it's impossible for me, okay? I cannot just spend a night with a guy. I fall in love right away. Other subject for another time. The key to growth and to happiness and to joyful life is to see our responsibility in things. Is to not think that relationships happen to us, but the active role we play in everything. It's very freeing because we realize it's not just bad luck. It's probably a pattern, something we're reproducing. We realize that by changing ourselves, we can change the world around us. We can pick better partners, better friends. We can be a better person in those relationships. And that, to me, is true empowerment. Empowerment is definitely not just this kind of hustle. It's like you can make it happen. It's like anybody who's with you is going to be lucky because you're a great girl. It's not true. You're just human. You're like everyone. You have great sides and terrible sides, and I think it's important to keep all of these in check. Taking ownership and responsibility is so freeing because it allows us to be human, and it also allows people around us to be human. So now that I have matured and I've been able to look back at my relationships, anytime I feel like I'm going to this place of control, of fear, when I feel my body getting tense, I remind myself of my mistakes of the past. I breathe in and I try to remind myself that I'm imperfect and that I have to give others space to be imperfect too. I'm able to see their generosity when they accept me for who I am, and to give them this sense of real love in return. But I know that this part of me will always be there, and that I have to be soft and sensitive and listen and know the signs. It takes a lifetime to learn how to be true to ourselves and to the people we love. I hope that this episode will have helped you find your way to your truth. Talk to you next week, my loves. Le Rendezvous is brought to you by Doré. Doré's latest launch, La Micellaire, is a botanical micellar cleansing water that doesn't require rinsing. Minimize bathroom time and maximize outdoor time with our super simple routine. Use code PODCAST10 for 10% off your first order. Thank you for listening to Le Rendezvous. If you want to know more about me, find out about my newsletter and my community, find me on Instagram at Garance Doré or at my website at garance.world. And well, if you'd like to find out how to spell that crazy name, just check out the show notes. Until next time, sending you love.